I'm Ronnie from Ronnie's Garage, and I am the Technical Chairperson for the Southern California region of the Rolls-Royce Owners Club. And today we're going to cover resealing a Turbo 400 transmission once it's out. Well, they always tell you about knives, always work away from yourself. Razor blades are even worse. Well, this is heavier gauge metal, but this is another example where you can see that these are reversed. The only way I know to do this is pretty much just bend them out. That was a little too much, by the way, but it'll straighten itself out. We got this gasket. We're almost done. You can get a lot of parts for these transmissions, especially the pan gaskets, this gasket and all that, that are cork. They're like a cork composite. I recommend you don't get those, only because the cork will tend to split if you tighten it too much. This is, they call this Durapreme, which is a pretty thick gasket material. I recommend, if you buy the parts, if you can get them, to get the paper-based ones. And this one also, like the transmission pan, I'm only going to put the sealer on the side with the sheet metal. I'm not going to put it against the case. Okay, here's your modulator. This is the original style. It's big, has a straight hose on it. They work fine. There's no hole in it. Nice thing about these, this is a replacement. This is a modern style. If you look in there, there's a little screw slot. So, since it works off a vacuum, sometimes the age of a car will have a lower vacuum, or if it has EGR valves on it that come on a lot, you'll lower your vacuum. You can tweak it. You can adjust this screw and change the shift pattern. It's just a nice thing. Now this doesn't need sealer, it's just an O-ring on this. I don't recommend that. It goes on there, and then these flanges, oh, I should have showed you how that works. What holds it in is this is spring loaded. Once you tighten this down, it pushes it in and holds it. And you notice that other modulator had a straight hose. Well, this one has a nice curved hose that you can use on it.
Is that just an automatic part of this transmission surface? You replace that, or is it?
If it had one of these small ones, I wouldn't do it, but it's got that old one. It's another 20 bucks or whatever it is. They're not expensive.
I found when I replaced my modulator, I had to back the screw out.
Yeah, because you're, yeah.
I don't think I have a lot of vacuum.
All right, now we get to put this thing back in. It's not empty yet. I might make a mess, but I want to show that it's important here when you put it back in to get it all the way in. If you look at this, it has these dogs here, and what they do is they fit inside the front pump into a gear that turns the pump, and then it has to go all the way in. Now it doesn't always go right in for you. Let's see if we got any more fluid. I bet you my hose fell out of it, I think. See that? But to put it in, get it on there. And you see how far it's sticking out. When I pulled it out, it was only about maybe a ½ inch. So just like those clutches before, you got to turn it. I think that's about it right there. There you go. You hear that? There's that sound again. I did it when I was spinning. If you don't have it in right, you're gonna bolt up your transmission, and if this is sticking out too far, it's gonna bend your flex plate. You won't be able to get your bolts in. Could break the flex plate.
It's not much farther from where you were to rebuild the transmission. When you took the tail shaft out, you had your clutch back.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it is and it isn't. It could be when you see one with the burned fluid like that, you could always tell the customer long term, you're going to keep it a long time, it's out, go all the way, or.
That's a tough call sometimes. If the thing worked great, I don't recommend it. To finish taking it apart and taking cleaning everything properly, taking the valve body apart, cleaning and polishing, doing everything, you got another 8 hours. Is what I would say. So that's another $1,000 plus the kit, the stuff inside, Because all those little things you got to take them apart, you got to inspect them, make sure everything's right. So a lot of transmission shops, I've heard of people going in and had a leak, and then they say, oh well, you might as well just do this, and $2,000 later they're out of there when they may not have necessarily needed it.
What about buying the whole unit? Can you buy the whole unit new and put it in?
Well, I'm sure you could. I've never priced one, but I can't imagine that it's, because this
Cheaper
is a
than-
Rolls-Royce specific case.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the guts, you mean, buying that all new? No, I don't.
No, I just meant like bolt in a new transmission. That's
You could, but it would be pretty
a lot
expensive.
more than that.
Pretty expensive.
You couldn't just find an exchange turbo hunter, like a rebuild shop,
From a roll.
because the case is different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you find that.
The early ones, this is the dog that had the dipstick. Were on the early Shadow transmissions. They had a hole there, but they had a aluminum plug in there that's driven in there with an O-ring and then peeled over on the edges. But this is a later one, so they quit doing
In
that.
the mid-70s, they swapped it, switched it.
Yeah, that's probably because the Shadow ones pretty much all had that plug.
Mine for 78 is that case right
Is
there.
this one?
Did you replace these hoses at all?
Only when they leak. These go to the body, which go to lines to the bottom of the radiator, which a cooler is. The very early Shadows had a cooler that bolted down here, a heat exchanger, that had the steel lines going to this cooler, and then it had heater hoses coming down, water hoses down there. They're a lot more difficult to service because you have to pull that cooler out. Sometimes the hoses are bad and you get coolant everywhere and all that stuff. All right.
Doesn't this have a speedometer? I know
It has a speedometer drive.
You didn't.
I didn't do that, you're right.
do that.
It
one.
is bone dry. And that's,
Okay, so
there is-
Is it a common leak point, that one?
sometimes, especially, this one's got a metal, if you look at the center here,
Right.
this one's got a metal shaft. The seal and nose never go back. And like I said, this one has a metal speedometer gear. You can see it in there.
Phone bumpers?
And they generally don't leak too much. There's an O-ring around the outside. If you see fluid leaking there, then you pull that out. Later cars, they use the plastic gears and a little rubber seal here that seals on them. And what happened on these most of the time is you'll pull it out, put the seal in, and you'll see that this has got a divot in it, and the plastic just wears. That's what happens. So you always want to change the gear. And they have different tooth ratings. What does this one say? I can't read. PG. It is 43 tooth, this one. And they're usually different colors. There's one other that they use too. I forget what number. So if you do have a leak at this area, you have a plastic gear, definitely change the gear with this little chintzy seal.
And you got to pull the transmission to do that.
No, you can do that in the car.
Oh, you can?
You can access this. The actuator hangs here, but you can still access this. There's one
Oh, I see it.
bolt that holds it on. I can
Yeah,
pull it
the
off so
cover
you
like
can
the
see.
vacuum modulator.
Let me-
Okay.
Yeah, let me just pull it
Is
off.
that gear specific to Rolls-Royce, or is that just a GM gear?
GM gear. Once again, it has like a spring plate like that holds it on. Let's see if it comes out. Boom. So, It has an O-ring out here, which I'm going to change now once I've taken it apart. You see it's got a metal gear. Now, if this is not leaking, do not change that seal. Because more than likely you're going to ruin this and ruin the housing. These things become seized together. It's just my recommendation. I've messed them up before myself, so I know that firsthand. You put your new O-ring on, put that back in there, make sure that these line up the way they were before. Don't do it. I mean, you could probably do it that way, but they're meant to. It's meant to be in a certain position, I think. That's simple. And what goes on, screws on here is on early cars they had an actual mechanical speedometer cable. Later ones, I think Shadow 2s, they went to, when they changed the instruments, they went to electronics. So what you have is a little transducer that screws on here, and it's just like a little pulse generator in a way that tells the speedometer what to read.
My speedometer at a very low speed has a little bit of a movement to it. Is it because of the electronic piece? Possibly.
It could be, but more than likely it's just the speedometer itself.
Inside.
The dash.
Right. And you can send them
It's
out.
a little magnet, right?
It's got a little electric motor in there that turns the numbers, and I think it runs also a ring of magnet that tells because there's no direct contact.
Right.
But they need servicing. A lot of the that style speedometer, which came in, I think Corniche 76, and then Shadows and on 77 on, they had an electronic speedometer, and they have the resettable odometer, and they have the continuous odometer, and they will stop working on the cars.
Yeah, that's how mine started.
Right.
The odometer stopped.
And what happens?
And then it
Yeah,
kicked in.
yeah,
And
there's-
actually, the speedometer portion of it worked okay. And when the odometer portion was repaired, that's when the speedometer was it's a little funny.
Well, it's kind of coincidental there, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
kind of.
I wouldn't think it's someplace else. Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Great.
Hope you enjoyed us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for what you do for the club. Great.
No problem. There we go.